Hello, lords and ladies. Today we're going to look at Japan and Korea in their earliest stages. We're going to take it up to the point of feudalism in Japan, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. So what we're going to look at this point in time are the objectives for today. We want to look at the impact of geography on Japan and its development. We want to look and try to figure out which civilizations influenced Japan and to what extent they actually influenced Japan, because you're going to see that Japan is very homogeneous in terms of its culture. So foreign influence is there, but it's not as impactful as you see in other countries and civilizations that we've talked about. So discussing also how location impacts Korean history and why where it is made such a difference to how it was going to grow and develop and the culture that was going to be found there. So these are the things that we'll be looking at. If you need more time, you can pause it. First things first with Japan that we have to look at is the actual geography of the nation. So when we take a look at Japan, one thing that you guys should remember, it has something in common with Great Britain. And that fact is that Japan is an island nation. So you're talking about, unlike Great Britain, you're talking about even thousands of islands that are making up Japan. Now, not most of them are inhabited. The ones that are the largest are going to be listed here, and we'll talk about them. But it is, in fact, an island nation. So thousands of islands that we're talking about. It is an archipelago. That word means a chain of islands. So Japan is an archipelago, like Hawaii, okay, except Hawaii is not a country, and the Aleutian Islands and things like that. Anything where you see a chain of islands. The four largest islands and where the majority of people live are Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. So when you look at these islands, the largest island is Honshu, and it is where a large portion of the population does live. So these are the largest islands that make up Japan. And I'm going to show you a map so that you can see better what it looks like and get a sense for, why these are the islands where most people live, because the other ones are so small. So we're going to take a look at the map, and on this map you guys will see Honshu, again, is the largest, containing Tokyo. Hokkaido is way up to the north. Shikoku is down a little bit further. Kyushu. Now, we want to look at the other effects that geography has now. So you've seen the makeup of the country itself, the fact that it's an archipelago, that it's a chain of islands. What we also have to look at is where that chain of islands is. And something that impacts Japan is the fact that it does lie within the Ring of Fire. If you know anything about the Ring of Fire, you know that it's a very active place in the world. And so we're talking about volcanoes, earthquakes, lots of plates, tectonic plates intersect and come together at this point in the world. So that's why we see so many of these volcanoes and eruptions. Japan is also subject to a great number of tsunamis, which are ginormous waves that cause a lot of destruction. If you remember that there was one several years ago that hit Indonesia and Thailand and these other countries where they did tremendous amount of damage. In late summer and early fall, you have a typhoon season, which is very similar to what hurricanes do in the United States, and it's a very mountainous country with mountains covering 80% of all land in Japan. So the amount of land to live on is very small. Let's take a look at the Ring of Fire so that you get kind of a sense for this. Just that this is the area of the world where you're going to see a lot of activity. This is Sakurajima. It's a volcano. It's still active right now. It had several eruptions in 2012 and 2011, and today in 2013 it is too. And this is Mount Asama. Mount Asama has not erupted massively since 2009. So we're going to hope for Japan's sake, because Mount Asama is actually located on Honshu, which is the largest island of Japan and where most people live. Mount Sakurajima is not in that, populated of an area. But it is still a destructive volcano. So what we have to look at is how has the geography of the region actually shaped Japan? And anytime we talk about geography, you should know that geography determines where the people live, population distribution. So most Japanese people live in river valleys and on the coastal plains. They have a limited amount of farmland, but what they do have is incredibly productive. And I'm going to show you some pictures of present-day Japanese farms so that you get a sense for that. They're on the sea, so the sea provides food and it provides a means of transportation so that there can be cultural diffusion, but at the same time it provides them a buffer so that people can't easily get there. And we'll talk about that when we looked, well, you see, we did talk about that when we looked at the Mongols. So that is what we're looking at first in terms of how geography has shaped Japan. And I do want to show you some photographs so that you get a sense for what agriculture is like in Japan. So the first photograph is just some farmland. You'll see that there's some terracing going on there to try to maximize the amount of farmable land. Very beautiful. This is just a field, okay, in Japan. And the next one is actually a rice mural. It depicts a volcano and a tsunami wave, kind of, as we see there. So that's made out of rice plants. Okay, in terms of other impacts of geography, Japan is a wonderful nation to do if you get a geography essay on your regions, or from Mrs. Riley, hint, hint. And so what we look at is what I had started to talk about before, about the sea being a vehicle for the Japanese to travel, but it also provides them protection and isolates them from most other countries. As a result of this, in their early history, the Japanese are going to develop their own culture, and that means they don't have outside influence from other countries, and certainly not any that really changes them fundamentally. So we call that a homogeneous culture. Even though it's separated onto different islands, the Japanese people still speak the same language, use the same writing system, believe the same types of religious beliefs, so you are going to see some outside influence, but it's minimal, and what it does do, it seems to do for everyone. So you don't have a whole lot of difference in Japan in terms of that. It's a very powerful culture for that reason, because you can't really break it apart. It's a very, very united group of people. In terms of its social organization, we want to look at early Japan and what kinds of things come about in the early stages. And what you guys should see is that the Japanese people are organized into clans. Clans are large family groups, so they're based on family relationships. And the clans come together and they worship the spirits of nature, and they call the spirits of nature the kami. So the Shinto religion is based on worshiping the spirits in nature. So Shintoism is the primary religion of Japan. It does not have a sacred text. It doesn't have a formal structure where this is the priest and you go to church on Sundays. It's not about that. It's about worshiping nature, ancestor worship, and building shrines to the kami, the nature spirits that we talk about. So the Shinto religion is not mutually exclusive from other belief systems. It can be integrated into and work with other belief systems. So let's take a look at, it's just a small chart I wanted to show you. In the center you see the torii. This is the symbol of the shrine and Shintoism. It's a gate, and it represents the division between what people know on earth and what the world is according to God. So here is an actual Shinto shrine. Whenever you see that structure, it's a Shinto reference. And this is another one from the Heian period. So when we look at Japan and the fact that it's organized into clans, we want to look at how one clan becomes more powerful than another. And there's no better example of this than the Yamato. The Yamato clan claimed that the sun goddess was its ancestor, and that allowed the Yamato to control much of Honshu, the big island of Japan. And those chiefs then called themselves the emperors of Japan. So you're starting to see the origins of Japanese government. Other clans are constantly warring with the Yamato, and they do take power, but because the people respected and valued the Yamato emperor, they kept him, but they controlled him. So even if another clan was in power, the Yamato emperor was still there. But what that tells us, and the principle that that establishes for the Japanese government that you guys are going to see into next year's material, is that the emperor doesn't really have power. So that should kind of remind you of the government system that we just recently talked about. Feudalism, right? Hopefully you had that right in your brain. Okay, in terms of cultural diffusion that does impact Japan, thinking about it logically and in terms of where things are located, in its location, you should see that it's going to be influenced predominantly by China and also by Korea. So when we talk about influence of countries on Japan, we're talking really about China and Korea. Contact between China, Korea, and Japan starts to increase throughout the mid-500s and on up. So we're looking at the medieval period here in Japan as compared with Europe. Korean scribes are going and they bring back Chinese writing with them. They also bring back the ideas about Buddhism. So Prince Shitoku, who is the leader of Japan, starts to spread the ideas of Buddhism throughout Japan. And then in order to try to make his belief system stronger, he sends scholars all the way to China to learn. And so you see impacts from both Korea and from China, and from China through Korea. Buddhism, again, is going to come from China through Korea. So Korea has a very unique role in this, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Now, the period in Japanese history that is where we consider it somewhat of a golden age is called the Heian period, and it occurs from 794 to 1185. So you're looking at almost 400 years of very strong rule from the Heian. Heian becomes the capital in 794. This is a time where the Japanese nobility absolutely lives it up, and they build elegant structures, they learn from other civilizations and practice more sophisticated court rituals. And during this time is when they start to look at the emperor as being a god. If you remember, the Yamato had said that they were descended from the sun goddess. So at this point, the people themselves start to look at the emperor as though he were a god. This is going to impact Japanese history all the way up through, even into World War II, which we'll talk about next year. But that's kind of the fundamental basis here of the Heian period. In terms of the court life of Japan, why we know so much about it, and we do know quite a bit about it. It was very, very soap opera-esque. But the reason we know so much is because Heian women write all about it. The first novel, one considered the first novel in the world, The Tale of Genji, was written by a Heian woman who wrote and talked about the court life of the Japanese leaders at this time and how they interacted with each other, what their significance was in the society, and we know a lot of that because of these women who wrote novels such as The Tale of Genji. So again, Japan, again unique because we have females in a position of authority and spreading scholarship, and that's a picture derived from The Tale of Genji. We're going to take a swift break from Japan at this point, and so you get the point with how Japan is progressing. We're going to look now at the other country that has contact with Japan, and that is closest to Japan, and that is Korea. Korea is located between China and Japan, which makes it a cultural land bridge between China and Japan. You gotta just get that concept. The fact that it's there is ideas come through China into Japan because of Korea. So Korea facilitates, meaning makes easier, cultural diffusion between China and Japan. And Korea itself gets a lot of its ideas from China. So that is the impact of geography on Korea. It goes right back to your objective for the day. You have to understand that Korea is a cultural land bridge and that it brings in new things to Japan from China. Buddhism, writing, all kinds of things. Now this is a little map that I want to show you. And again, these are harder to come by, but it is a map of ancient Korea. Okay, and you should see that Korea is a peninsula surrounded on three sides by water. That location then again allows it contact with both Japan and China. Korea itself is similar to Japan in some ways. First one being that it is very, very mountainous. Most people do in Korea live in the western parts of the country. It, like Japan, has limited land for agricultural production. So farming, very, very limited in Korea. And to this day, that causes a lot of problems for them, particularly for North Korea, because as you know, or hopefully know, today the Koreas are separated, North and South. So North Korea has a tremendous amount of difficulty with trying to feed its people and keep its children alive. Sad as that sounds. And it's cold in winter and hot in summer, so it's similar in climate to what you see in the United States. Now, in terms of living in Korea, we said you have two today, North and South, but back then it was one country. But what you're going to see is that China and Japan quite often throughout its history control Korea and they take it over. So you'll see that progress as we go throughout the whole entire course, not just Global 1, but Global 2. China even to the point where they were involved in the Korean War. So a lot of influence from China on Korea. Japan later on is going to have a tremendous amount of influence on Korea, although not invited. Alright, in early Korea, again, you have the formation of clans, very similar to Japan. It develops its own unique culture, but then China comes in 108 BC and claims part of it. So Korea starts to get their exposure to Chinese culture through that contact. And so Chinese writing system comes into Korea. The ideas of Confucius diffuse into Korea, so that you see some, emphasis on education, things like that, respecting elders, filial piety. Buddhist beliefs come into Korea, and as we said, those and the writing go forward into Japan. And farming. Farming is going to be difficult in Japan, China, and Korea in places, and so a lot of terrace farming, where you saw those built in, almost looking like stepped farmlands, come into play. So a lot of interaction between China, Japan, and Korea during this period of medieval history in these areas. I hope you got a pretty good overview of this, and I will see you tomorrow. Enjoy your evening.